Local programming on KRWG Public Media made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Anthony Moreno. Welcome to Your Legislators. Joining us to talk about New Mexico's legislative sessions and issues facing the state is District 37, New Mexico State Representative Joanne Ferrary. Representative Ferrary, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to talk with you. Obviously, a big deal during this legislative session and all legislative sessions is the state budget. Lawmakers are crafting that right now. I know you're involved with some other committees, but some that may impact this. I'd like to hear your thoughts on what are some of your top priorities with the budget that concern your district?
With the budget, we are for sure supporting education expansion for teachers to have health care, for the programs in the schools to be well funded and effective. Also getting some extra things in like Soteria Las Cruces, which is to have a place for people with behavioral health needs that are along with bipolar and serious psycho developmental problems where they could get the support they need. So we're trying desperately to get that into the budget, as well as other community like Los Amigos, which would have behavioral health in places where people can go and stay and get support for getting jobs. There's a lot of different things that also, making sure that the capital outlay that we will be submitting the end of this week to make sure that we bring from House of Representatives, we get $2.5 million for capital outlay, and the Senate gets quite a bit more because they have more constituents. But getting and bringing home to Doña County and to Las Cruces the important assets that we've seen come in from the oil and gas company and other, gross receipts, taxes, things like that, to make sure that we have the infrastructure and support to our city and county.
A lot of issues going on within the legislative session. You brought up a couple of big ones. I want to talk about mental health legislation. Can you share with us what you're working on in regards to that to address mental health concerns? A lot of lawmakers have discussed this leading up to the legislative session. What are your thoughts on how to address mental health in your district and the state of New Mexico? And you can share with us some legislation you're working on as well.
Great. Yes, raising the liquor excise tax to $0.25 a drink, no matter whether it's beer, wine, or distilled spirits, will give us the funding we need. It'll also reduce consumption, which leads to a lot of alcohol-related deaths. And we are the highest in the nation for alcohol-related fatalities. And so if we can raise the excise tax, which hasn't been raised for over 30 years in our state, 1993, and we need to make sure that that reduction of consumption, plus also the funding that's generated, goes into programs that will help with behavioral health, with the prevention and treatment and recovery programs. There's a group that we already have, and we want to have a coordinator that will work with all of the different nonprofits and groups and providers, along with the state agencies, with Department of Health and Human Services Division, with Behavioral Health Division, also very important in this design. So that's something that I think will, we've gotten through the Health Committee, this last week. And so we're waiting to go to our next committee, which will be Judiciary, and then onto the floor and then onto the Senate. So that's something really important. Also, tobacco tax rates to make it so that we at least have vaping and other nicotine products equal to what the cigarette tax is now in their own terms. It commensurate with that. The parity is needed, and that will help prevent young people, especially from starting to vape or smoke, and also help with reduction of use by tobacco users. So that I think will help our area a lot, because there's so many people who start by smoking and then go on to drinking, and or do both at the same time. And we need to make sure that we support people with programs that will give them the services that they need. And it's not a regressive tax, either one, because the funding that is generated by the tax increase will go into services for low-income people and make it so that they can, live better lives, they can be more productive, and we will be able to reduce with alcohol-related incidences and deaths. It's over 2,200 people in the past year, and the 17 and 13% for the past 2 years increases. We need to do something drastic and do this now.
There's some obvious concerns there that you brought up. Of course, the data with how alcohol and impacts New Mexico. There's been a lot of reporting on the issue as well from various news outlets across the state. I'd like to hear from you, though. Where does New Mexico rank in taxing liquor compared to other states?
Well, other states haven't increased their rates either for a long time. Some are in the process of doing that because we realize it's scientifically based and research based, how this helps to reduce consumption by raising the tax. And New Mexico would be, in some cases, high, in some, and more medium, depending on, there's different ones for beer and wine and distilled spirits or fortified wines. So, we could be up towards the top, but if we are the number one for alcohol-related deaths, we need to do something drastic and make this so that it works to the benefit of reducing, as well as for the provision of treatment and prevention and services.
I know in the past, and this is something you're passionate about, you've done work advocating against preventing, against alcohol-related deaths in the state. And I'd like to hear from you, though. I mean, you want to tax the liquor and provide services, but New Mexico in general, and a lot of parts within our region of Southwest New Mexico, has had difficulties providing services for substance abuse, providing services for behavioral health. How do you translate that money coming into actual infrastructure within the system to make sure these services are available?
Well, it will. Right now, we're generating $45 million, and half of that goes to the general fund. Now, with this increase, we would generate $200 million. And while we're working to increase the educational higher ed for having more social workers and having more people go into psychiatry or counseling, having peer counselors with certifications, making sure that we work on developing more people that can be providers and in healthcare system. But having that funding will help set up more programs and more places for people to be able to get those services. And also the prevention. in the schools, in Department of Health, be able to do the outreach, to be able to do screening and brief interventions, encouraging that of doctors and healthcare providers that will help people realize that, even just 4 to 5 drinks at a sitting is binge drinking. And half of the state doesn't drink at all. And then we have the other percentages that are excessive or heavy drinkers. And we are every one of us, bearing the cost of over $1,000 a year in providing the health care and the impacts, whether it's through DWI, whether it's through domestic violence, whether it's through, alcohol-related deaths and losing of the loss of productivity of that person. It is costing New Mexico a lot of money, billions of dollars, and we need to do something to turn that around.
I want to move on and talk about another issue that you're involved with, and that is firearm legislation. Can you share with us a little bit about the bill you're working on and trying to get through the House?
Yes, that would be HB 9, and it's unlawful access to a firearm by a minor, and nicknamed Benny's Bill because of a young man in Albuquerque who was shot by a classmate accidentally. And it protects kids from gun violence and prevents senseless tragedies by holding adults accountable if they do not safely store firearms away from kids.
So with this bill, can you tell us about what the crime actually leads to? Is this a felony? Is this, how do you see this being implemented?
Well, right now it is, I believe they were talking about a misdemeanor, but I think they changed it. But I think it's still a misdemeanor. But unless someone is hurt, it could become a felony. But it's so important. When I was 12 and before we moved to Albuquerque, my friend, she had 5 kids in her family. We had 6, and we were both oldest. And she was babysitting, and her younger brother got a hold of the family protection gun. And she tried to take it away from him so he wouldn't get hurt. And instead, the gun went off and killed her. And that has always impacted my life, to think about guns, not being in the home. And if people do have them, that they make sure they have a lock on them, or they're in a storage safe, or just put away someplace where kids cannot get them at all, ever.
I'm sorry for your loss and this issue, and this is an important issue, obviously, that's being discussed within the legislature. There is a lot of concern with gun violence in general as well. So I'd like to hear from you. How do you really enforce this law? There may be some law enforcement out there that are just kind of wondering, how do we police this law?
Well, it would have to wait until there was an incident, but the idea that we're sending, or message that we're sending to adults, might make them think proactively to have that storage before something happens, and that they would have to be held accountable. But in working on this bill with Mike and Kristen Song, who lost their child to a similar incident as Benny Hargroves, where he was with a friend. And these types of scenarios happen all the time across the country. And we need to make sure that people realize, and for gun safety in our schools, this is one of the most preventable ways to have to prevent gun violence in the schools, is from kids not being able to have access, and then have in anger or any situation go to their school and have a tragedy.
There's been a lot of discussions on how to prevent that, gun violence in schools, a lot of concern, especially after the massacre in Uvalde, Texas. Some folks have said that we need to provide armed security in schools, or we need to arm teachers. What is your perspective on how to address that issue?
Definitely not arming teachers. You never know if someone could get a hold of that gun from the teacher's desk, or even take it from her purse, or it's just not going to. Look at all the security that came in, and they still couldn't stop the Uvalde from continuing to happen. And so that definitely is not an answer that I would be in support of.
Now, with your bill that you're proposing on keeping firearms away from young people and securing those firearms, what is the response from your colleagues across the aisle? Is this a bipartisan bill?
I'm not sure how the vote was. I can't remember exactly, but I think a lot of people have the misconception that it's going to keep young people who are going through a special training, or want to go hunting with their family. That there were plenty of exceptions to make sure that this did not impede certain activities. So I'm not sure they always listen to that, and but the fact is there are exceptions to make sure that under controlled and parental guidance, that these activities for young people can still happen.
Yeah, you bring up a number of activities. Hunting is a big part of the culture here in New Mexico. There are a lot of hunters, sportsmen, people love to shoot. How do you work with organizations that support those recreational activities to ensure that their input is included within the consideration of this bill? Do you have any response from them?
Yes, we hear a lot from people who are in those kinds of sports, and there's because we have those exceptions. That's how we responded to their concerns.
Now, I want to talk with you about another issue that's been a big issue for you, and that is abortion. Over the last year, we saw the overturning of Roe v. Wade. How do you think the New Mexico legislature can address this issue within the state to ensure that abortion is still legal within New Mexico?
Well, we are going to make sure with House Bill 7 that reproductive and gender affirming health care is provided, and across the state, by prohibiting public bodies, including counties and local municipalities, from denying, restricting, or discriminating against an individual's right to care.
Now, the governor has also called for a clinic to be funded by state, possibly in Doñana County. Can you share a little bit of insight on what this would look like? Are you involved in any of those conversations with establishing a clinic that may offer abortion care services within our county?
Yes, the governor spoke about that in her campaigning for re-election, and it's expected to be $10 million that the governor would invest in, reproductive health care in Doñana County. And so we're looking forward to those plans going forward.
With this issue, what do you think? This is a really hot button issue for many folks across the country, within our state as well. I know there was a rally here last summer after Roe v. Wade on both sides of this issue. So how do you have those conversations with everybody in the legislature in supporting that legislation that you brought up to kind of have these conversations where people understand each other's perspective and it remains civil?
Oftentimes we just have to agree to disagree. There's really not a way to convince them except by explaining that, you know, everyone knows somebody who's had an abortion and who needs reproductive health care. And we need to make sure that we continue to have the access and affordability for these measures, because a lot of times it's a family that can't absorb the costs of another child. Sometimes it's happens because of the health of the mother or the fetus. And so these are very personal and individual decisions that have to be made between a mother, her beliefs, and her doctor, not with politicians.
Another issue that Republicans have been criticizing Democrats in our state on has been public safety. Now, you mentioned gun legislation earlier that you were working on, but what do you think needs to be addressed during this legislation on public safety? Because it is a growing concern within Las Cruces, certainly, and other parts of the state.
I think that having services available for people so that they aren't desperate to commit a robbery or to hurt someone, that we have the behavioral health services that we provide, places for people so that they aren't homeless and so that they aren't desperate. Also, I think a big part, reducing alcohol use is going to make it so we have less domestic violence incidences, a better home environment for kids, not to be awakened, in the middle of the night and not doing well in school. I think all of these things come together, and it's not a matter of just increasing penalties, because people don't stop and think about what the consequences are going to be. They're reacting to something in their life, they're in their situation, and if the more we can relieve those kinds of pressures, financial pressures, making sure that people can get good jobs, that we steer them away from drinking so that they can keep a job and the financial security for their family. Those things all have a concerted effort to making things safer for all of us.
We only have about 3 minutes left with you, but I'd like to hear from you. Is there any other legislation that you're working on that you think is one of your top priorities during this legislative session?
Well, yes. Passing the Green Amendment is something that we very much want to have, those protections for clean air and water and soil, a stable climate, and environmental justices, that having it available for people to be able, as citizens, to vote whether they want a Green Amendment and not have the barriers that are being put in different committees, and also clean energy is that wants to come in and put up transmission lines, which is great, but and producing solar, but they are denying our state from being able to protect at the local, municipal, and the state level, the having the protections we need. And we have statutes, but there might be something that comes up and there isn't a specific statute that would protect that person. But with having a Green Amendment or the Environmental Rights Act in the Constitution, will make it so that everyone, when they're making decisions for planning and zoning, for permits, for lots of different things, that local government has to weigh in the environmental impact that these decisions will make and make sure that we are protecting for individuals and communities, that we provide, pure water, clean air, and have the environment that everyone deserves.
We have under a minute left with you, but do you know of any other states that have implemented in something close to this? And can you share with us just really how much of an impact that may have had?
Yes. Montana has had a green amendment for many years, as well as Pennsylvania since 2013. Theirs was kind of updated. And just in the last year and a half, New York has passed their own green amendment. And what's so great is that each state has the basic tools for the protections, but they've modified it to their own. Like we mentioned, protecting the different cultures in our state and making sure that New Mexico has been a sacrifice zone for years, since the nuclear age came to be, through mining, through explosions. We still have the downwinders who need to be protected at the federal level, and we can't get that through. But with oil and gas and, the different things that our state is extracting, we need to make sure that it's done as safely as possible. Not that we want to stop those things, but we need to make sure that it's not impacting our air, water, and soil in a way that people suffer more health conditions or even loss of their farms or things like that. And we're also I'm working on a bill with the Office of Natural Resources Trustee to make sure that we can, that the trustee can protect the dairies from PFAS for restorative measures. And on the state level.
A lot of big concerns there. Unfortunately, we're out of time. District 37 Democratic State Representative Joanne Ferrary, thank you so much for joining us on Your Legislators.
Thank you. It was nice to visit with you, and hello to all of our constituents. Thank you.
And we want to thank you for joining us for this program. I'm Anthony Moreno. We'll see you next time.